Sarah and Sancha and John. We will move on to item number 14. Kevin, you're on the spot. Kevin, John and Andrew.
On the spot.
Oh, Bill. Oh, that questionnaire.
It's just taking a while to work through.
Wayne thought I was having a little heart attack because I was 45.
I didn't think I was here.
Not sure what was going to happen.
45. But she'll be doing it.
That's too hard. I know. I'm not going to let it happen.
Oh, yes.
We did it yesterday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can't be a 45.
Yeah, so we have a short presentation here. So before I start, I'll just introduce, in case you do not know, the two gentlemen with me. So John O'Brien, on my left here, is manager of corporate property, so the owner of the building. And Andrew Hollis is project manager, so a lot of experience in significant projects of this nature, and draws that experience into this one. So from the owner to the project side. And as I say, we've got a short presentation here. Really, it's a progress update as to what stage we're at, following on from the information you provided just prior to Christmas, and talking about what the immediate steps are we're looking at doing. So if I just step my way through this, first up, 135 Albert Street. So the building was purchased in 2012 by council. It was a significant opportunity as part of our footprint accommodation strategy to actually vacate some leased premises we had at the time, to bring staff within the CBD together into one location or three at this stage, one from those other alternate sites, and also to implement the workspace performance strategy, which is actually just to develop a much more efficient working space. The building is now 25 years old, so it's not new by any means. An issue was identified at the time of purchase, and since then, through additional work, it's now been identified that was more material than originally anticipated. Important to know, there's nothing been identified to raise any concerns whatsoever about the structural integrity of the building. So it's a robust building, and also just to squash any concerns there may be about that phrase leaky building. In no way is this a leaky building, where any water ingress is actually damaging the structure of the building itself. What the issue is we have here is around the stonework cladding. So it's the clothing on the building, and that's what has to be fixed. These are just really to give some indications of the sorts of issues that were identified, these pictures here, and I won't go through all of them, but what it is giving is a series of range, because there is no one single feature that's actually been identified as a shortcoming. The top one in the top left here, you'll see here, is a situation where there's a lot of packers between the stone and the bracket, which is affixing the stone cladding into the subframe beneath. And in the case here, we have lots of packers, which is probably more than is ideal for that situation. On the right-hand side across here, you'll actually see is the opposite situation, where any packers that were there have actually fallen out. So they just keep the distance between the structure and the cladding. Other cases we can see down here, one of the most obvious ones, which was identified at the very beginning, was the failed sealant. So the silicon there is just degraded over time, and is actually no longer performing the original function it was intended. What you see here is just an indication of the bracket at the bottom where the stone panel sits on top of. And in the situation here, it's been highlighted because the gap there that exists between the bracket and the cladding is more than is ideal in this situation. As is mentioned in the report, you'll see that the notion of these ones here, you can actually see is these were actually taken by putting a boroscope in behind panelling. So it was
Just do both sides sometimes.
Oh, yep, sure,
Thanks,
sure, yep, no, I'll do that, yeah. So the ones on the left-hand side there, you'll actually see where the boroscope was put in there. So, limited lighting, but to get a feel for what the situation was. And that's part of that due diligence process undertaken. So for a timeline, because obviously this is something that's actually happened over a period of time. So 2012, due diligence was undertaken, I should say, at the time of purchase. It was deemed the appropriate level at the time. Due to the fact is what we're talking about is the cladding of the building. It runs right up the side of the building, so there's obviously this cost constraints in actually going further than we did at the time. But what it did do was identify there was an issue with the fixings.
Yep.
2013, during the process of actually refurbishing the building to get it fit for purpose for the intentions of what council was going to use it for, there was some more invasive investigations undertaken. And what that report identified was, yep, the fixings needed further investigation. There were some issues identified at that stage. Continuing on, 2014, as As a result of those earlier ones, there was some additional investigation undertaken, and this was moving more up the columns on the side of the building, the ladder columns that worked their way up beside the windows, and the degradation issues were identified there as well. So it was getting a better feel now for the nature of the concerns, but also just the scale where it was occurring. 2015 was this chance to really bring it all together, so do a full peer review, assess what had been identified previously, what is now known, and actually come up with some proposed actions and risk assessment at that stage. I mentioned risk because obviously that's a significant concern of ours. This building, it's not only our staff and yourselves that we have in the building, there's also tenants we have visitors in the precinct too. So all of that is a paramount concern to us. So from that 2015 report, which was November, some immediate works were undertaken just to mitigate that risk. Now, it is worth pointing out at this stage, when we talk about risk, what is the scale of the risk? Obviously, the implications, if any cladding came loose, is significant, and that is a serious concern. What has been identified, though, is it's a low likelihood at this stage of anything falling. You cannot mitigate it completely, or you cannot eliminate it completely. There's always that chance in a high-rise building. But the likelihood at this stage is assessed as low likelihood, but the implication potentially is high. So the immediate one you could do was the fencing, and that's what you saw go up prior to Christmas, which was to exclude people from what was identified at the at-risk area. The next stage, which is the crux of why we're here today, is what else can we do to mitigate risk? And that is the notion of actually putting something at the top, which will actually, if anything is going to fall from the top level of the building, that'll stop it immediately, catching in the scaffolding. And the other is to actually build a working platform, which will serve a couple of purposes. Primarily, it's if anything did fall, it hits the platform and stops. The other is that it actually becomes part of the enabling works. That platform becomes the base that you then start to actually do any remedial works off of. Cost to date, so look, the original purchase was $104 million through negotiation, including some discounting into there as part of the negotiation process. The direct fit out, $24.5 million or $25 million we've put here, was to actually fit the building out for the purposes intended. But we need to be upfront. There were additional works undertaken at the time, all within approved budgets, and it came back to committee at the time. And these additional works were for things like the workspace rollout, so changing the way we were going to work had to be done. It was going to be done regardless of which building we're in. That was incorporated into this building, some of the features. There were some efficiency gains, such as the LED lighting was incorporated throughout the building, which has ended up saving us year by year as the operational costs have significantly reduced. And other works, such as some things identified in the initial due diligence reports around the services, it was not identified that those works would have to occur at some stage. It made sense that as you're doing a refit, so if you're removing ceiling panels and things, it makes sense to go in and do some of that servicing work at the time. So I say all of that was actually discussed, budgets were approved for those, and everything ended up being within budget for cost to date. Project governance, to give some degree of assurance on how it's been run. Look, the very first point is probably a really important one, and that is the way it's been treated as a significant project as we would undertake as a council. We undertake large infrastructure, building works all the time. This happens to be one that we're actually resident in ourselves. There is a steering group established, which is 4 executive lead team members. So we have Sue Tyndall, we have Dean Kimpton, we have Jim Quinn, and we have Barry Potter, all bringing their expertise and oversight into the project. There will be now regular reporting going through to Audit Risk Committee. There is a risk attached to the building, the nature of the issue, so we'll just ensure that the risks and the mitigations we're undertaking, project works, will go to that committee on a regular basis. I mean, look, I have to say obviously, but the notion is that if there's any material procurements are going to occur as a result of this, that will go through appropriate channels, in this case, Tenders and Procurement Committee. And also, as we're doing today, if there are any budget financial conditions attached, anything that we need to bring to light, we'll be coming to this committee to bring those to you. So there's various aspects to the governance of the project. As far as next steps go, as mentioned briefly before, so to further mitigate risk, we're looking at the hanging scaffolding at the top of the building. We're looking at the nature of this working platform, which, as well as mitigating risk, also becomes the start of whatever that next step is. To achieve this, we do need to look at bringing some budgets forward. So as part of the original due diligence process, there was works identified would have to occur at some stage. Budget is available within the renewal program of that building. What we're seeking to do is to bring those budgets forward, because those works have to happen sooner than originally anticipated. In parallel with that, the assessment of what the options are that can be undertaken to fix the substantive issue behind this will be done. Detailed design work is it's proceeding to a certain extent, but we'll actually escalate that and run that in parallel to doing those enabling works and safety works. And what we'll do is look to come back to this committee with those options coming out of the project work, what those options are, what the associated costs are attached. So that's the step we're at right now. It's mitigating the immediate risks as much as possible, as practical, and ensuring we actually assess what the options are going forward for the next stage. End of the day, look, in summary, it's a 25-year-old building. It's a high-rise. It's in the middle of a CBD environment. These sorts of things happen. An issue was identified, and it was I won't say with certainty, but it was known that things in the building would have to be fixed at some stage. It just so happens that this is going to have to be fixed quicker than we thought to actually ensure that any risks are actually managed. So that's a short presentation just to bring it up to date where things are at right now.
Thank you. Well, I'll move the recommendation.
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today is one of those days when I really wish this council had a Hansard, a record of the direct debate that took place. And I want to raise the issue of accountability, but not doing so in a way in any way, I'm very, very comfortable with the oversight that is now being given. I'm very comfortable with the recommendations in terms of how we move forward. But we've got to learn better from history. And what is being lost here, and for those who were not here as part of the first term, it was an acrimonious decision. And I want to defend the Dick Quaxes and the Mike Lees and others who were very concerned about this. And I also want, and you can snigger, but the reality is this was a major investment by this council. And there were those who sat around the table, as we are doing right now, and said, this is a 25-year-old building. You are taking us out of civic because of some asbestos that has been known about for many, many years and can be addressed. And we were advised by the CEO and Andrew Mackenzie, both of whom are no longer here. So there's no point pointing fingers at this point, but we were advised, and the whole debate became one about 5 stars or 6 stars. It just took off in another whole direction. We were given the comfort of understanding that due diligence would deal with those matters that a building 25 years or older may potentially have. So to a degree, some of us are not surprised with this report coming back because we weren't comfortable with the information that we received at that time. So I am now still of the view that the best thing we can do is sell that building. And I would like to hear today about what, obviously we need to spend the money on it. I mean, you'd have to be a fool not to. But was it the right decision by this council? The process was not as straightforward as some may have remembered. And I am sorry that we don't have a Hansard, because all of those speeches, impassioned speeches that were made by Mike Lee and Dick Quax and Cameron Brewer and a few others, and we were told we were shroud waving. You know, we now have this dilemma. I'm only raising it because I don't want to see us do this again in the future. So what are the safeguards? So if this is to go back to an oversight committee, what are the learnings that we are going to take from this to make sure we don't do this again? That's really my question today, Kevin. And I realise it's hard to come along with this report, and I don't want to delay things, and I'm going to support this. But I'd like to see us sell it, and I'd like to see us actually have some new recommendations for procurement that will ensure that we go into things with a higher level of due diligence than was undertaken at the time, because all the assurances that were given to me at the time haven't proven to be much good.
Here.
Okay, yeah, look, I suppose there's a few observations to make. One was that at the time, the full business case was undertaken, and we looked at options, and the valuation attached to this particular option of 135 Albert Street was significantly less than the other options that were put up at the time. The fact of what we're talking about here is unlikely to change the financial and economic situation in the business case. Yep, you're right, there was a lot of debate at the time. At the end of the day, a decision was made and the decision's been implemented. As far as learnings from this, look, the due diligence process undertaken at the time was to inspect